We're back with another episode of App Stories. Today's show is brought to you by Clean My Mac X, Electric, and Vitally. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Vidici. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing really well. We are continuing our Club Mac Stories membership event.
What is that?
This week.
People should know about that.
If you haven't heard, we're doing a lot of extra things for the club this week. So everybody who's already in the club can look forward to town halls and Discord, extra columns by you and me, giveaways, discounts, all sorts of things happening all the way through the end of the month. And on top of that, if you're not a member of the club, we're offering 20% off all annual plans through October 31st. So this is the best time to get in on Club Mac Stories because we've never done a deal like this before, and I don't know if we'll do it again. You know, the time to strike is now, to join the club, see what it's all about, and have a lot of fun because we're doing even more than we do most weeks.
Yeah, it's a good time to be a club member. You know, between the discounts, the offers, and the content that we're rolling out, it's a fun time, and especially with the Discord and everything. Yeah. All right. So John is, in a good way, responsible for this week's topic. Why don't you pitch me and the listeners, John, on the topic you had in mind?
The topic for today is web apps that you and I use. And what got me thinking about this was a story in Fast Company, on the Fast Company website by Jared Newman about Obsidian, as the headline referred to it, the cult of Obsidian. The cult. Because I was quoted in there. Jared got in touch and asked me why it was that you and I are fans of Obsidian. And he was, he mentioned in the story that it's somewhat surprising because it's not a native Mac app or a native iOS app. It's, based on web technologies. And you and I have talked about this before. It's really a trade-off between design and utility, or, integrated native features versus utility. And that's why we use Obsidian, because of the plugin architecture and the flexibility of the app itself. But it got me thinking about other web apps that we use for similar reasons. And also, it got me thinking a little bit about the Mac, because this is one of the things I wrote for the club recently, was about what's happening these days with the Mac in terms of apps. And I think that
tell me what's happening these days in terms of apps.
Well, I think the Mac App Store has never really caught on in the way that the iOS App Store did. I mean, I think that that's more than fair to say. And there are plenty of apps that are available outside of the Mac App Store too, but a lot of companies these days are becoming web first. And they probably do eventually come out with a mobile app of some sort. Not all do, but a lot do, whether it's Android or iOS or whatever it happens to be. But the Mac is usually the place they turn to last. And they'll either not do it at all, or they'll do a fairly poor job wrapping some sort of web browser type app in the skin of an app on the Mac. And they're not always very good. And so what I think Apple's doing that's very practical is they came out with Sonoma with these single site web apps that you can create simply by saying add to dock in Safari and turning a site into a web app. And I've done a lot of that. I'm using like a dozen or more of these now, Federico, because a lot of times, even if something has a separate Mac app of some sort, it's better in a browser tab. But I don't like working in a browser tab. I like them to be single site web apps that act like apps themselves. And there's also kind of a privacy angle there because those things are sandboxed, and the sites that you're visiting in a single site web app, they're not able to have any visibility to the other tabs you have open in your browser because you don't have other tabs open. You have simply that one site in its own container. So that's what I've been doing. And that's, I think that it's a very practical solution to a trend that we've seen, which is web apps being the way companies go just out of sheer economics of wanting to cover all different kinds of systems without having to build a Windows app and an Android tablet app and and a Linux version and a Mac version and all that sort of thing. So especially on the desktop, I think that that's very true. This episode of App Stories is sponsored by Clean My Mac X. Junk files, hung processes, and malicious apps can slow even the latest, most powerful Macs. Maintaining your Apple machine, whether it's old or new, is essential for smooth macOS performance. Clean My Mac X is an all-in-one maintenance tool that takes care of those old junk files, faulty apps, and malware in an efficient, aesthetically pleasing, and hassle-free way. And using its menu bar app, you can monitor your Mac's health, CPU load, and a whole lot more too. With nearly 30 million downloads and 15 years of expertise, this app is a must-try for any Mac user. Clean My Mac X is perfect to get ready for macOS Sonoma if you haven't installed it yet. And as Apple continues to pack Macs with innovative features, Clean My Mac X ensures that your hardware remains healthy and running smoothly all the time. I've been a Clean My Mac X user for a very long time. It can sit up there in the menu bar and let you monitor all your systems on your Mac, which is a really nice way to make sure everything is working and in order. It can help you uninstall apps. It can help you find that malware. It can free up your RAM. It can get rid of those old files. I've used it for all of these things. It's an all-in-one fantastic tool for that sort of thing. And right now, all App Stories listeners can get 5% off Clean My Mac X. Check out the link in the show notes or go to macpaw.app/app stories to download it today for 5% off. Again, that URL is macpaw.app/app stories or click the link in the show notes. Our thanks to Clean My Mac X for their support of the show.
I think it's interesting that you don't mind using web apps, but also don't like working in a browser.
I know. That might be a generational thing to a degree too.
How so?
Because in the sense that I very much grew up on apps, like native apps, and I feel like for me, the browser is a place to read and research and not to actually do the work. That I like to have those things separated because it's too easy with a lot of browser tabs open to lose track of whether it's, a tab for Slack or Discord or whatever it happens to be, or Raindrop even. It's too easy to lose those, close them, not be able to find them. And I like having them as standalone apps instead. And it's, at the end of the day, I do prefer native apps. And this has been like a long journey for me, I think, as a Mac user, which is I've really come to the realization that I need to embrace web apps to a degree because I'm not going to just ignore entire categories of services and apps that might help me get my work done just because I prefer an AppKit app and the deep system integrations that you can get with that. Where I have to, I turn to web apps, and it's worked out fine for me. It comes with its trade-offs. You don't have the kind of integration with system features usually that you would get with a native app, but you don't always need those system integrations. And for some things, the utility of having that service available to you outweighs finding maybe a secondary app that is native but just doesn't work as well as the web service.
I feel like I understand the perspective of the Fast Company story about like it's surprising that a website like Mac Stories likes a product such as Obsidian. I understand why they may think that. I also think that it's not surprising, and let me explain why. Because like you, I prefer native apps, right? And this is coming from the perspective of somebody who literally just spent 6 months of his life and a lot of money, parentheses, trying to make Windows happen in his life. as I call it, my wilderness period, in which I really wanted to understand and look around me. What is it like to not use Apple platforms? And the thing is, my personal preference, my personal taste is I prefer Apple's design, Apple's sort of interactions when it comes to software, and I prefer using native apps. But there's an asterisk here, which is if the native app, or if all the native apps, all the options I may consider, do not make me as productive as I can possibly be using something else, I am not religious about them. So if Obsidian makes me more productive and efficient, but it's not a native app, there are worse problems in life,
Right.
And I would sign up for an Electron app that makes me considerably faster in the work I do and more consistent in the work I do any day over sort of respecting this dogmatic behavior of, oh no, I am not touching a web app or something made with Electron. Ultimately, the time I spend in front of the computer, I need to minimize that as much as possible, right? And I need to maximize the profit and my enjoyment doing what I do as much as possible, right? I don't think neither of us would just like staring at our computers and be like, oh, you know what? I'm having a great time using this native app. No, you just want to get your work done, right? So that you can spend your other time with your family or playing video games or getting drunk or whatever. So yeah, I prefer using native apps, but if something else makes me more efficient, I'm going to use something else.
Yeah, no, I think that that's absolutely where I come down as well, because there's only so much time in the day. And sitting there, and you're not gonna. I'm not sitting here opening my native apps and admiring the buttons in the UI. I'm trying to get something done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so a lot. Sometimes that means turning to a web service. I think I noticed in our notes about Obsidian, you have a really good point here, which is about REST APIs.
Yes. Okay. So that's the point I was almost forgetting to make, and thank you for reminding me. The other advantage of web services and web apps is that more often than not, they come with a web API that allows you to integrate the web service with something else. And typically these are called REST or RESTful APIs. And these web APIs, these are programming interfaces for web services. They allow you to, and I'm going to simplify here, to make requests to a web service and either create data or retrieve data, like, for example, post an article on WordPress or get the latest items from your Mastodon timeline. Those are all examples of web APIs. It's a common language that allows any computer and any web server to make a request to another server and get or pass some data. This is why services like IFTTT or Zapier or Make.com are popular, because they allow you to sort of create these connections between web services and web apps made by different companies that don't know each other, and yet you can make them talk to each other by using these services as the glue in the middle. Now, on Apple platforms, there are, right? There is the equivalent of a REST API, and that is shortcuts actions. The problem with shortcuts actions is that they are limited by the current automation system on iOS, HyperOS, and an automation system that is not existent on macOS, unfortunately. The thing is, the idea is similar. You can use these communication methods to retrieve data from apps and to pass data to apps. The issue is that a lot of popular desktop apps on the Mac do not come with native shortcuts integration. And on iPad, you do have a much more vibrant ecosystem of native apps that are compatible with shortcuts, but those actions have memory limitations or reliability problems that don't exactly make shortcuts. At the moment, a super reliable glue between apps that you can leave on and enabled in the background at all times. You need to know what you're doing. Whereas I believe that services like IFTTT and Zapier, they feel to me more reliable and faster, right?
Right.
And more flexible than shortcuts. The idea is the same, but the implementation feels more. It feels like there's more freedom on the web than there is with shortcuts actions.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Electric. When leading your small business, it's not all glamour. In fact, sometimes it's a matter of spending hours onboarding an employee, which you're well equipped to deal with, but you maybe don't have the time to do. The team at Electric knows small businesses, maybe ones just like yours, can face challenges. That's why they're on hand to help with the time-consuming parts of your business, like standardized device security and best-in-class device management software so you can implement best practices across the board and be ready to scale. And employee onboarding and offboarding done for you, saving you an average of 8 hours per request. Plus, Electric will help you keep a single point of visibility into your IT environment to control your devices, networks, and applications. While simplified reporting allows you to achieve and maintain compliance, and proactive IT recommendations and automated workflows make IT easy to manage even for non-technical users. And look, if you're hearing this and you think your company could use some of the services, but you're not sure where to start, Electric has experts who will guide you through the process of establishing standardized IT processes for your organization. One of the things you learn when you run a small business, and I certainly know that I've learned this in working with Federico on Mac Stories, is that you're not an expert on every single thing, and you need to know when to ask for help, because it's always money well spent. Because you'll end up struggling and spending far more time and effort dealing with things that aren't your area of expertise, that end up costing you even more money and time in the end. That's why you call on someone like Electric, someone with the expertise and know-how to help you out. For App Stories listeners, Electric is offering a free pair of Beats Solo 3 headphones for taking a qualified meeting. Just go to electric.ai/appstories. That's electric.ai/appstories. Go there now to get your free pair of Beats Solo 3 headphones today for scheduling a meeting. Our thanks to Electric for their support of the show. Why don't we talk maybe, I guess, a little bit about some of what some of the services that we're using.
Yeah.
And for me, there are two kinds of apps here. I guess there are things like Obsidian, which is an actual Electron app on the Mac. So it's app-based. But there are also the services I use either in a Safari browser tab or as a single site web app. And as I said, kind of at the beginning, I've migrated an awful lot of this stuff to those single site web apps. But there aren't really a lot of other Electron apps that I'm using besides Obsidian. I guess GitHub Desktop on my Mac is probably the one that I use most often, and it's not because first of all, it's actually a pretty good Electron app as Electron apps go, because it doesn't suffer from the slowness that a lot of Electron apps do. It's not the best Git client out there, but my needs for using GitHub for syncing the stuff that we write are pretty modest. I don't need any fancy features. So having that free app available so I can sync things for the club and stuff like that is more than sufficient for me. But speaking of the club, the two things I use the most are our own internal tool. We have our own posting system for Club Mac Stories that is something we call Calliope, which is an interface and backend that Alex Guillot built for us that, it works kind of in the same way that WordPress does, but it's a lot simpler and a lot more tailored to the kind of work we do, where we're pasting in Markdown and adding tags and other formatting metadata in order to generate stories for the club website. So there's that. I keep that in its own web app. And then, because one of the things that's nice about that too, Federico, you should try it out sometime, because I'll open it up, I'll paste in a story, and then I'll hit the preview button, and it opens up a separate window. So I can kind of have side by side on my Mac. I can have one window that's the markdown document that I may be editing, and the other one I can have the preview, and I can update one to the other and see them side by side, which is pretty nice. The other thing I use in a single site browser is MailChimp. And I've found that MailChimp runs better this way than it does in a Safari browser tab. I don't know really if that's a placebo effect or what, but or whether MailChimp has tuned up its back end in recent months just to kind of coincidentally coincide with the Safari update with Sonoma. But I don't get the memory warnings that I used to get with MailChimp. And I do kind of like having it in a very stripped down browser window that comes with these single site web apps, because the lack of additional Safari Chrome just means there's more room for me to kind of work on the newsletter itself, which is, MailChimp works as kind of a template system where you've got a template and you've got a preview. And it benefits from having a lot of space, and I think a single site web app works really well for that.
Yeah, I still haven't tried those single site web apps on Sonoma, but I really want to. I think there's obviously I'm using all the same web apps for the club that you're using, because that's our workflow, and if you think about it, our acceptance of web apps shouldn't be a surprise. We are running a web company after all.
Yes. Everything we do touches the web at some point.
Everything we do, whether it's the Mac stories or the club or RSS feeds or the podcast or Discord, everything we're doing is possible thanks to the web, and that's all there is to say about it, really. There are two web apps that I think I use the most personally. And the first one is Matter, the read later service. I feel like I've made up my mind, John, in terms of which read later app I want to use. And I think I'm going with Matter. I spent, just like with other things in my digital life, I spent months researching, switching back and forth, trying different solutions. And I think at the end of the day, Matter is the one I like most, because of the elegant design. Now, the new ultra realistic voices that they have, which sound super good. The fact that there's a business model, everything about Matter sort of aligns with the kind of service I would like to have for a read later app. Now, they don't have an Android version, so they're not fully cross-platform yet. But they do have a web app that you wrote about in your story about, I guess that you spoke about in your big reveal about the Books Ultra, Tab Ultra. Is that the name?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep, that's it.
And you are also using the Matter web app in a web browser. You just go to web.getmatterapp.com, I guess is the domain, and you sign in, and you can read articles with a text parser mode in a web browser.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm doing that. It's interesting. Matter doesn't have a native Mac app. I do keep the iPad version installed on my Mac because it's a Apple Silicon Mac, because that allows me to have access to their share menu item that allows me to add things using the share sheet. So if I find an article on Mastodon, for instance, in Ivory, I can easily add it to Matter right there, which is really nice. They also have a good Safari extension that has on and off been broken as a result of Sonoma updates, but they've been on top of it and fixing it along the way. I'm not sure why these betas seem to break at almost every update, but they've been on top of it, and it's gotten stable again. The reason I also keep this in a single site web app, Safari web app, because I do find that when either the something breaks, I like to have the fallback of using the web version. And I find the web version to be the best way to read matter on the Mac. Plus, as you said, I've been using the web version on my Tab Ultra because there isn't, I think I could swear that somewhere I saw someone mention that Matter is coming to Android, but I haven't been able to find that reference again. So maybe I imagined it. I don't know. But even if they don't, the UI in a browser on Android actually looks really good, and it looks really good on e-ink too. So I've kind of compared it side by Readwise, which has a native Android app, but their Android app on e-ink ends up, for some reason, a lot of these Android apps end up where the text all looks like it's all bolded, and it's a bad reading experience. And that's kind of where they're at right now. I haven't tried Readwise in a browser yet. I need to do that because maybe it's better in a browser, like, Matter's good in a browser. But yeah, it's a really great app as a web app. But on my iPhone and iPad, I do use the native apps there. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Vitally. Customer success teams today are facing a problem. How do they connect customer data back to their work? Vitally changes that. It's a new kind of customer success platform, an all-in-one collaborative workspace that combines your customer data with all the capabilities you expect from today's project management and work platforms. That's because it's designed for today's customer success team. That's why Vitally operates with unparalleled efficiency, improves net revenue retention, and delivers best-in-class customer experiences. It's the solution to helping your customer success team keep a better pulse on your customers, which maximizes productivity, visibility, and collaboration, and can boost your bottom line by driving more revenue per customer with Vitally. And if you take a qualified demo of Vitally, get a free pair of AirPods Pro. So, if you're a customer success decision maker actively seeking CS solutions, working at a B2B software as a service company with 50 to 1,000 employees, and you're willing to explore changing customer success platforms if you already have one in place, all you have to do is schedule your call by visiting vitally.io/appstories to get that free pair of AirPods Pro. That's vitally.io/appstories for a free pair of AirPods Pro when you schedule a qualifying meeting. Our thanks to Vitally for their support of the show.
The other web app that I use on a daily basis at this point is Home Assistant. And well, I guess that's technically a web app, but it's running on a local IP address on my home network. But hey, it's still a web app that I need to access from a web browser. So unlike John, and maybe if you want, you can talk about this in a minute, I have Home Assistant running in a virtualized space on my Mac Mini. I got the UTM app running on macOS. UTM is a virtual machine that allows you to spin up virtualized images for other operating systems. So effectively, I can use Linux in a virtual machine on my Mac Mini. I have an M1 Mac Mini, and UTM is fully compatible with Apple Silicon. So I got Debian, the Linux distro, up and running, and I installed the virtualized version of Home Assistant. And so now I can access Home Assistant on my local network by going to a local IP address. Those things like 192.168, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And the beauty, there's two great things about this. First of all, it's a web app, and from any browser, I can go there and turn off my lights or, control the state of my temperature, whatever. Like I can just fully control my house. My house is fully compatible with HomeKit and Home Assistant, by the way. So we're gonna talk about this we're gonna do a town hall all about our HomeKit setups, and I will be able to describe why my home is compatible with multiple automation standards and platforms in that town hall for club members. But yeah, so I can go from any browser, right? Whether I'm using my iPhone, iPad, Mac, Steam Deck at some point, ROG Ally, like no matter the computer I have, I can go into my dashboard in Home Assistant and make changes. But the other beautiful part is Home Assistant is fully compatible with a REST API. So there's an API that you can use to automate and retrieve data from your home and from accessories in your home using whatever you want. And in my case, I am building some shortcuts, right, on iOS and iPadOS that talk to a web service. Even if it's running on my local network, it's still a web service, right, to perform tasks in shortcuts and to actually, and this is the most fascinating part, to combine, to mix and match HomeKit controls and Home Assistant controls from shortcuts. This is sort of like next level of that concept of a glue between services that I mentioned a few minutes ago.
Right.
And this will be the topic going forward of the renewed and more approachable Automation Academy for Club Plus and Premier members. I will be getting into the weeds of all this, so to speak, but I will try to make it super clear and easy to understand what I'm doing. But the idea being that there are benefits even for home automation when it comes to having web access and a web API that you can program from whatever automation tool you want to use.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to writing about that because I don't know, my home, I want to get into Home Assistant, but I kind of decided that I didn't want the complexity of dealing with running virtual Linux machines and things on my Mac. So I went down, I did something that I should never do, Federico. It was called purchase first, research later.
Oh, no.
And so I got the Home Assistant Yellow, which is it's essentially hardware that you combine with a Raspberry Pi in order to run Home Assistant on your local network. So, and what you do is you use a Raspberry Pi Compute Module 4, which is a Raspberry Pi that is basically the guts, the brains of a Raspberry Pi without all of the inputs and outputs that you would get if you bought a full Raspberry Pi. My problem was I actually bought a full Raspberry Pi because I wasn't thinking, and I didn't get the compute module, and the compute module is incredibly hard to find. It is in short supply. The Raspberry Pi company has been prioritizing enterprise customers, so it's very hard to find on the consumer market. And if you go looking for them, people are actually selling them for like $250, $300, even more than that. And you know, one of the benefits of a Raspberry Pi is that it's supposed to be affordable, and that's a lot more than they would normally go for. And so what I did, now that I have the Home Assistant Yellow and no brains for it, is I went ahead and pre-ordered a Home Assistant Green, which is their new hardware.
You're doing all the colors.
Yes, I am. That has all of the guts that you need to run Home Assistant in it without having to supply your own Raspberry Pi compute module.
Okay.
All right. Now, it's not out yet. I pre-ordered it. It's coming in November sometime. So I'm probably only about a month away from having this. So hope, you've got a month to write your stories because I want to have some things to work on as soon as so I can hit the ground running when this thing actually shows up on my doorstep. But doing that was cheaper than trying to get a compute module for the Home Assistant Yellow, which I have. Maybe I'll sell it. Maybe I'll give it to one of my kids. Maybe I'll use it down the road. I don't know, but I have it. And I also have a bonus Raspberry Pi that I can, use for some other project, I suppose.
All right. Do you have other web apps you want to mention?
I do. One that I want to mention that is new to us is that we've been testing out Twist, which is a little bit like Slack or Discord for team communication. And we've been using it since we've been expanding the Mac Stories team and wanted to have a better way of communicating as a group that isn't, iMessage threads, which get really messy and busy very quickly. And I wanted to mention this in particular because Twist has a very nice Mac app that has a great design, but the Mac app doesn't have all the features of the web app. So I'm using, yet again, another Safari single-purpose web app for Twist, because one of the things I can do in the web app that I can't do on the Mac is that I can go in and I can edit what they call a thread. So one of the things we're doing is every week we have a thread that's dedicated to that week's issue of Mac Stories Weekly for the club. And what I do at the top of that thread is put in there what everybody's working on. So we can kind of track what the main sections of the newsletter are going to be, and then we can discuss them below. And I throughout the week, I go in there and I edit it just to kind of expand on whatever it is that I knew on Monday to what I know on Thursday for what's going in the newsletter. And so that's why I'm using that as a web app as opposed to their I don't know, I guess it's a native Mac app. Maybe it's not, maybe it's Electron, who knows, but it's a pretty good app otherwise. What else am I using? I guess, things that I'm using Grammarly because it's a good check. I feel like I get overcharged for Grammarly because I don't like there's so many features in Grammarly that I don't use. There's a lot of stuff, they always want to change your style. And you know what? I'm not letting a computer change my style, but I do appreciate it finding commas that I've missed. Maybe, a double word that I've inserted in a sentence and have skimmed over and not seen, or, a comma that was been put somewhere instead of a period. It's just the little stuff more than anything else, cleaning up small typos that I use that for. And then Raindrop too. What's interesting about Raindrop is its Mac app is identical to using it in a browser tab. There's really no difference whatsoever. And so you can use it really either way, I suppose. But it is all very much based on web technologies, and it's cross-platform. It's something that I'm using on my Tab Ultra because there's an Android version there as well, and it allows me to have my bookmarks available anywhere I am. All right, Federico, that's a great conversation. I'd be curious to hear what some of the listeners' favorite web apps are. I mean, you can hit us up on Mastodon and let us know, because I'm always on the lookout for interesting new services to try. I want to thank our 3 sponsors for this episode. That's Clean My Mac X, Electric, and Vitally. You can find Federico and me over at macstories.net. We're on Mastodon too. Just go to vitici.macstories.net or johnvorhees.macstories.net to find us there. And we're on Instagram, where Federico is at Vitici. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.